In a quaint little café tucked away in the heart of London, a crisis was brewing that had nothing to do with the usual hustle and bustle of the city. The air was thick with tension, and the atmosphere crackled with the kind of electricity that only a true British tea emergency could produce. Nigel, Gareth, and Margaret sat around a small table, their faces reflecting a mixture of horror and disbelief. The waitress had just delivered the devastating news. They were out of tea. Nigel, with his impeccable manners and a flair for the dramatic, clutched at his chest as if he were about to swoon. His eyes widened in disbelief, and he gasped, I can't breathe. Did she say no tea? The very idea seemed to strike at the core of his identity, as if someone had announced the cancellation of Christmas. Gareth, ever the skeptic, leaned back in his chair, raising an eyebrow as he surveyed the situation with dry wit. This is how civilizations fall. First, no tea. Next, anarchy. His tone was laced with sarcasm, but there was an underlying truth that resonated with the others. Without tea, what would hold the fabric of British society together? Margaret, a no-nonsense woman with a fierce love for her brew, shook her head gravely. The Queen didn't live through 2 world wars for this, she muttered, her voice low and serious. It was as if she were mourning not just the loss of tea, but the very essence of British resilience. Amidst the turmoil, an American tourist named Chad, blissfully unaware of the gravity of the situation, piped up with an innocent cheerfulness. Hey guys, why don't you just drink coffee? The moment the words left his lips, the 3 Brits turned to him in horror, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and indignation. Nigel, nearly fainting from the shock, whispered, He said the C word. The mere mention of coffee was akin to an affront to their very culture. Margaret muttered under her breath, We don't say that word in polite society. Gareth, with a bemused grin, couldn't help but elaborate. Listen, mate. If we wanted to feel jittery, anxious, and on the verge of making terrible decisions, we'd just vote in another referendum. His dry humor cut through the tension, but the reality remained. Tea was sacred. Chad, seemingly unfazed, laughed heartily. Oh, you Brits and your tea obsession. It's just a drink. The 3 Brits gasped collectively, as if he had just declared that the sun revolved around the earth. Nigel, his voice rising in indignation, exclaimed, Just a drink? Just a drink? That's like saying Big Ben is just a clock, or the Queen was just a nice lady with hats. His words dripped with the kind of passion that only comes from years of cultural pride. Margaret leaned in, her voice low and intense. Tea is the backbone of this nation. It's the one thing that holds us together in times of crisis. She spoke with the conviction of someone who had lived through countless cups of tea, each one a moment of solace in a chaotic world. Gareth, nodding in agreement, added, Remember Brexit? The only thing that kept us from absolute civil war was that we all had a cuppa and collectively sighed. The truth of his statement hung in the air, a reminder of the power of tea to calm even the most tumultuous of times. Chad shrugged, seemingly unfazed by their fervor. Well, I mean, there are other drinks. You guys have warm beer, right? The audacity of his statement sent Nigel into a fit of offended spluttering. It's served at the proper temperature to bring out the flavors, unlike your icy beer, which numbs the tongue and drowns the sadness of democracy. Margaret, her patience wearing thin, interjected fiercely. We don't do things your way, Chad. We drive on the left. We queue with dignity. And we put the milk in after the tea bag is removed. Her tone was final, as if she were laying down the law on the very principles of British life. Gareth leaned in, whispering conspiratorially, Unless you're a psychopath. The comment elicited a chuckle from Nigel, momentarily lightening the mood. Chad, grinning like a Cheshire cat, recounted, You know, I saw someone put the milk in first once. But before he could finish, Margaret erupted, standing up and knocking her chair over in her fervor. Burn them! She shouted, as if the very act of putting milk in first was a crime against humanity. Just then, the waitress returned, looking apologetic and slightly frazzled. So we actually found a single tea bag in the back cupboard. The words hung in the air, and the 3 Brits inhaled sharply, their eyes wide with a mix of hope and disbelief. Nigel, sensing the gravity of the moment, stood dramatically. "There is only one way to settle this." Gareth nodded in solemn agreement. "Agreed." Margaret, ever the pragmatist, pulled out her phone. "I'll set up the duel." Chad, eyes wide with a mix of confusion and excitement, exclaimed, "Wait, duel? Like pistols at dawn?" Nigel scoffed, adjusting his posture. "Don't be ridiculous. We're British. We'll settle this like gentlemen." Gareth, seizing the moment, grabbed a spoon from the table. "Spoon duel. First to drop their sugar cube loses." Margaret nodded gravely, her expression one of fierce determination. That's the way our ancestors would have wanted it. In that small café, the Great British Tea Crisis had transformed into a spectacle of absurdity, with the fate of their beloved beverage hanging in the balance. The world outside continued its chaotic dance, but within those four walls, the true essence of British culture was on the line, and they were ready to defend it with all the pomp and circumstance it deserved.